Alright, so let's see what's next on the list. Bygone days. Sounds promising. With a name like that, it's likely a highly developed sim with a lot of interesting stuff on it for people to check out. Then again, I could be completely wrong. Now this looks interesting. Definitely a lot more to see than the last few sims I visited. So let's check out the land. Looks like relatively low usage of land geometry that is available. And group owned. J Moon Estates, interesting. This could be a commercial property. In other words, some sim owners, they build like a community type thing and then rent out the land or buildings on the land for people to pay a very low monthly rent. There's a lot of structures on here, a lot of complexity, so it's taking a little bit longer to load than the other sims that I visited so far. This is like the actual experience, basically, when you visit a sim that is relatively well developed. You have to wait for a very long time for everything to load, even on a high-speed connection. So yeah, as I was saying, on like a commercial sim, the sim owner will have all these properties that they will rent out, and people will like rent them and hang out there, and they have the ability to build things in their small bit of rented land. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, I think it's kind of a quaint notion to like have a little like home in a virtual world, because I mean, it's not like you really exist, just your avatar and inventory and so forth. But for people who like to sort of, are more interested in the role-playing aspects, it's kind of nice to have like a little, pad to hang out in. And if the rent's really low, I mean, like 10 10 lindens or izzies a month, then that seems fairly like reasonable. Although I don't even know if this is that kind of a sim yet. I mean, there's really no way to know until I've explored. Looks like we have some sculpty blue jays here, or I forgot what they call those particular types of jay with the little top notch. They are still rezzing, that's why they look so crude. Takes a long time for sculpties to manifest, especially when there's a ton of other objects. And also, it's typical on a commercial sim for there to be a store where either the sim owner will feature and try to sell their own creations, or they will rent out shops to other creators who will then manage the store and try to sell their stuff there. That's one way to raise money to be able to maintain the tier fee, aka rent. Pay the rent on your sim. So this is fairly interesting. It looks like this is a shop that sells religious artifacts, accoutrements for like churches and so forth, and it's also kind of designed to look like a church, which is fairly clever, I guess. And yeah, mainly just having to wait for all this stuff to res, which is kind of painful, but what can you do? This is the authentic virtual world experience. This is kind of like the town square, it seems. The little monument here. Nice blurry monument. Just imagine if this was like real life and you were like walking around and there was like a monument with like a perfectly crisp stand, and then on top of it there's like a blurry blob that you can't see and you have to wait for it to materialize. Maybe when we have like holographic projection systems like in Star Trek, reality will be like that. You'll walk into a shop and everything will be blurry until it loads. So I'm getting a fairly low frame rate, but it's not intolerable like it was with the other viewer. That's a good sign. Well, let's start with an overview of the sim just to kind of see what all is here from a bird's eye view. Alright, so looks like we have some kind of dock, riverboat type atrium thing here. Not really sure what that is. Then we have the sim owner's headquarters, like the manor house or whatever, where they would reside if they were real rather than an avatar. And this could just be a experimental kind of building spot where they have some kind of little cabin that they're trying out. And then they have the shop, Bygone Days, which is the namesake of the sim. And maybe another shop here. Seems like these are all basically shops, although that could just be like a hangout place, like a little cafe or bar or whatever. Then there's the church shop that has the religious artifacts. So, alright, now it's time to start examining each thing a little bit closer. Looks like we have the interesting sort of fountain, hedge, tree, stand thing. Oh, that's cool. So this is like the entrance. I'm almost tempted to view this in first person, but the problem is my avatar walks so slow and it's so much easier to view things with the camera that I think for the sake of the documentaries it just makes more sense to control the camera directly. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff in here. That's why I'm getting such a bad frame rate. All of this geometry and all of these sculpties are really, and textures of course, are taking a significant time to load. But that's how it is. I mean, it never gets faster than this, even on like a, if you have like a T1 connection, you're not really going to get a significantly improved performance. And like, I have a really powerful computer. I've got 8 gigs of RAM, got like a 4-core CPU running at 3 gigahertz per core, so I mean, I'm not exactly, oh yeah, and I have a 2 gigabyte video card, so there's really no bottleneck there. Oh wow, these are interesting. Little like music, oh that's cool, those are like pencils. Anyway, this is clearly a shop. These are for sale. Obviously you're meant to walk in here and browse, and if you see something you like, you can buy it for your own virtual property. I kind of like this. I'd say the building quality is below average, but it's not like horrible. Like they did a good job with the textures, at least good enough to where things read fairly well, which is really, I think it's more important for things to read well than to look really professional, because obviously there's a limit to the amount of geometry you can process, and that's not going to change anytime soon. I got stuck on this light somehow. So yeah, it's better to, for at least the time being, to have things a lower level of complexity, but yet build them well enough to where they read. Like these are a good example. Like these easels. You know, there's probably like maybe 8 to 10 prims there, and yet it reads perfectly well as an easel. Although ideally a sculpty easel would actually just be like one prim, and you'd be able to accomplish the same thing, but that requires a steeper learning curve when it comes to building skills. So I like the way this is laid out. It's fairly thoughtful as far as like it reminds me of like an IKEA or something where the each area is kind of like a zone with a theme, and everything is kind of like coherent in terms of the styling and use of color, so that basically each room is like or each aspect of the room is like an ensemble, you know, where obviously the um, shop designer was thinking that they would ideally sell an entire like set of furniture and accoutrements in one go, maximize their profits. It's a good strategy. I'm sure that's what all the professional builders do. I mean, obviously that's what is done in the real world, like IKEA, for example. So naturally, it makes sense to copy that strategy in the virtual world as well. Some of these pieces are quite nice, although I just have to say overall, um, they all kind of have the same sort of flaws, and that's that the builder is relying too much on the textures, and if they were just to bump up their game a little bit on the building side and rely less on the texturing and more on the building, I think they'd be able to make their work look a little bit more professional. It's not bad, like I say. I mean, this is definitely a little bit above average, these particular pieces, which is good to see. It's encouraging. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to point out that like these things that are like blurry, I'm going through here pretty fast, so they're not all having a chance to load 100%. So if something looks a little blurry, it's most likely just that the texture hasn't loaded rather than the builder was using low resolution texture. So just want to point that out. Yeah, this place is just stuffed with things. It's like a ton of geometry, lagging hardcore. I like these record players. Yeah, see, once again, it's just like they're so close to being like above average, but then there's just like these little bit of laziness in the geometry and the texturing not being exploited to the maximum that is ruining the effect a little. I've got some Art Deco stuff in here. It's my favorite style of architecture and aesthetic, so definitely liking what I see here more than the other rooms. But overall, there's quite a range of diversity of styles in there. I'm kind of impressed. If it's unlikely that it's one person that did all of those things, but it's not inconceivable. Lots of sculpts. I mean, this is just like pretty much everything is sculpt. And for those of you who don't know, there's basically, at least in InWorldz, there's only two ways to create objects, and one of those ways is with the traditional method is with prims, like this little greenhouse gazebo thing. So each one of these is a prim. It's a box, or there are several different shapes of prims, and you manipulate those to create objects. And the other way to build things is with sculpt maps, which is a little more sophisticated. And this plant would be a good example. Like it's hard to create organic shapes with prims. Therefore, builders will use sculpts, and sculpts also you can have shapes that are far more complicated than you could build with prims, and yet they use less um, geometry. Well, they use more geometry, but the prim cost is lower because they don't count as many prims. It's kind of hard to explain, but like this uh, whatever that is, it's some kind of little table. Oh, it's like a bar is what it is. That bar is like maybe 2 prims or so, and uh, a sculpty version of that would only be 1 prim. So therefore you'd be like saving prims, and you can have more structures and so forth. People like low prim cost, as I've explained in a previous video. So it looks like we basically have a shop trying to sell bar accessories, but it didn't look like there was really much in that one in comparison to the other one, which is just like loaded. So work in progress, I guess. So let's see what we got here with this little house. Ah, so this is like the kitchen shop, I guess. I'll say so far this is, I like this the best. I mean, this is really attractive. It's just like very simple, but at the same time very attractive. This is one issue with sculpts. They tend to take a while to load, and they tend to look really distorted and ugly until they do. So this is something to keep in mind. The refrigerator doesn't actually look like that. It's still loading. Although it's an approximation, so it's obviously not going to look radically different. Another thing with sculpts, and this is why I can't stand them personally to build with, is that they are never really geometrically accurate. Like for example, if you look at all these knobs here, each one of them is a little bit different, and they're basically just an approximation is what it comes down to. You can never really have a perfect geometric shape with sculpts, because they are more organic, you would say, because they're generated from a color map as opposed to an object that's predefined. So that's actually an advantage in one sense, because sometimes you want things to look more organic, and you can't really do that with prims because well, you can't do that with a low number of prims. This is curious. Looks like we have some piglets at play here. I don't know what he's holding on to. Is that like a shovel? Sleepy squirrel and levitating squirrel. Oh, that's cool. Some builders are just better at organic uh, things than they are at geometric. So that's also something to take into consideration, because some builders try to do both when they really are only good at one. It's definitely recommended that if you're better at one than the other, you should probably stick with that, because there are lots of people who specialize in geometry, and there are lots of people who specialize in organic, and you can't really compete quality-wise. But, I mean, there's always room for improvement, so it's not like you can't build your skills and become competitive, but it's just like if you have major skills with one, you should probably work with that. So this looks like some kind of riverboat type thing in progress. I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell since the builder used the same texture for the dock as they did for the boat, so it just kind of all blends together. But I mean, it reads clear enough. It's obviously some kind of like riverboat type thing. Okay, so let's see. I think we pretty much covered all the main structures. Here's a house. Looks like a looks like a house that's in progress, and the texture texturing is really not fully completed, and there's no real furniture or anything inside. So that's just whatever. And probably in the future it will be some kind of little house shop or something with all sorts of little furniture pieces and stuff inside that you can buy. And I think this is probably the most interesting building in the whole sim, mainly just because you don't really see a lot of religiously themed stuff in Second Life, I guess, or InWorldz, I should say. At least not that I've seen. So it's kind of an interesting niche, I guess you would say, that this person is working on. I'm not even familiar with all of the religious type stuff, although most of it's pretty easy to identify. There's like a pipe organ there. Yeah, once again, like, the builder is definitely like trying, but they just really need to work on their skills before these things are like up to snuff. Although clearly, like, these are like passable for, virtual worlds. People would probably buy some of this stuff. I kind of like this candelabra. It's not bad. Looks like the builders trying to have all their bases covered and all their religions accounted for, except maybe for, well, I don't really know. I'm not qualified to identify all of these. But yeah, definitely I'd recommend that the builders spend a little more time on the detail of their geometry and less on the texturing, and just maybe bump up their abilities a notch or two before they try to sell this stuff. So I mean, it's saleable, but at the same time, like, you could do a little bit better, I think. Of course, the complimentary swan pond over here is nice. Yeah, so that's Bygone Days. Definitely a lot of stuff going on there.